the Acushnet Board of Selectmen. There's a motion to call the meeting to order.
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Good. One appointment this evening. We do not have any minutes or meeting mail. Actually, we do have one item. Just want to call out. Tomorrow is the Acushnet Elementary School, Wednesday, January 25th, from 10 to 11. We'll be celebrating their national recognition, their learning community, exceptional student achievement and growth. So Mr. Hinckley will be representing the board.
Excellent.
And so thank you, Bob, for doing that for us.
I'm glad it worked out.
Yeah, absolutely. First appointment is our superintendent of our Old Colony School District, Mr. Aaron Polanski. Mr. Polanski would like to make a presentation to us about a school feasibility study. So with that, Mr. Polanski, if you can introduce yourself.
Acceptable to stand here, is that?
Yeah.
Sure. Can you see me behind the podium?
Yeah.
Just an update, one of the action items that came as a result of our meetings is that I'd like to make my way out into each of our member towns and provide updates relative to the MSBA project. A couple of years ago, we submitted a statement of interest. In our first attempt, our statement of interest was not accepted into the pipeline. In our second attempt, it was. And last March, we sent an email out to our member towns just to let them know that we had been accepted into the MSBA pipeline. That's the Massachusetts School Building Authority, for people who may be watching from home. And our eligibility phase, which is the first phase of this project, began October 3rd, and that will run through June of this year. And what we've done is we've put together a vision for the future. It's an overview of our why, and it explains, it's available on our website. If you go to the Old Colony website, there's a piece of the website devoted explicitly to the project and the studies being done to see what is and what is not warranted. So you can view the entire vision for the future on the Old Colony website. Again, in the spirit of transparency, we've created a page that will allow folks to follow the MSBA grant program. And the stage we're at right now is that we're looking to conduct a feasibility study. And what that feasibility study would do is it would tell us what the appropriate plan of action will be, and whether that's a renovation, new construction, or a hybrid of the two. And so we've allocated $1 million for a feasibility study. $500,000 of that $1 million has been set aside in a stabilization fund in planning for this, because we knew it was coming. So Old Colony has set aside $500,000 to put toward the feasibility study. We spoke with many of our member towns, and in those conversations learned that the best way for us to look to fund the other $500,000 would be through short-term debt. And so we've made a decision to ask our communities to support our incurring short-term debt of $500,000. And what that would mean is that each member community would take on a portion of that debt, and we would pay that back over a 5-year period. If we are accepted into the program, what would happen is we would roll that debt into a bond that's tied to the project. Before we get to that point, I'd also like to share that we've been advocating to put into place some legislation that would help to support a project of this magnitude. And basically that's through Senate docket 1697 and House docket 485. And I've shared a copy of that legislation or those proposals with our select board and town administrator, and we'll share that information with our other towns as well. Again, this process is iterative, and we feel it's our obligation to advocate as proactively as we can on behalf of all of our member towns to make sure that the outcome is as palatable as possible. And so, as a member town, everyone has the opportunity, again, to follow this online. I would encourage folks to do so. We'll have open houses and coffee talks where folks will be invited in to learn more about our plans. And if folks in the interim have any questions that arise, I would encourage them to contact me directly so that I can address any questions that may arise. But our goal is to really support and protect the investment that our towns have made since 1975. Selectman Gaspar is a graduate of Old Colony. We have a number of people in our member communities who have lived Old Colony firsthand and can speak to the importance and contributions that the school makes. And I think there's a reciprocity. You know, it's not. There's something special, you know, when we walk down and we see a shed at the Acushnet Public Schools that our students have built, or in Lakeville, you know, the lodge that our students built. There are big pieces, and by expanding and adding programs like a plumbing and an HVAC, we have a greater capacity to give back as well. We'd like to be a full construction operation. Right now we have limitations. If we were to add plumbing and HVAC, what we're able to do for our member towns is increased considerably. And so I think the other piece is that the labor market has demands for these things. So what we've tried to do is align our plans with the blueprint for the region through conversations with Mass Hire. And I'm hopeful and confident, and I think it's certainly a worthwhile project that we're looking into. But we don't have all the answers yet, and that's the reason for the feasibility study.
Great, thank you. So of the 500,000, first of all, I want to say this. I think the approach that you're taking really makes a lot of sense, which is you're looking internally first before you come to the towns asking for the money. And I say that not like asking for money in a bad way, but I just think that was really responsible of you to defray the contributions of the communities, so good for that. And I think also the approach of trying to spread out the contribution over a period of time to lessen the blow. Is it so? There's 5 communities in the district, right? So
Yeah.
Is it evenly, or is it based on population as to what the contribution would be?
It's based on enrollment. Acushnet is one of our highly represented towns. We would estimate, but not. I don't want to paint a concrete number, but we're estimating that the Acushnet contribution might be in the vicinity of $150,000, and that would be spread out over 5 years for this feasibility study. So that's an estimate. We don't have the formula is based on total enrollment as 90% of a number, and then 10% of that is school-age students attending, and we're waiting on the school-age students attending number. Once we have that, we'll be able to finalize numbers.
And then the last piece of it, well, gentlemen, any thoughts on, what Mr. Polanski, we have a budget process that we're actually officially kind of kicking off tonight. So.
And this actually will not touch the FY24 budget. We would anticipate that it would be introduced in FY25. That's my thought process. We'll have clarity on that at a meeting that's taking place February 1st. And we've invited our town administrators and a representative from the FinCom and the Select Board to attend that, and we'll have more clarity about when that might touch down, but we think that's for FY25.
FY25 for the feasibility study?
For the debt associated with the feasibility study.
So you're looking for the funding for this spring town meeting?
Correct. We'd like to have a placeholder on the warrant where we can provide you with the language
Right.
for the town meeting, and then the payments would begin FY25.
Jim and won't actually ask one of the questions that I was going to ask on is about, because I'm familiar with the budget process and how the budget gets divvied up. It's not equally in 5
Yes.
divided by 5.
Correct.
Would be nice if that's what we were, as 100 instead of 150. But would we have an option if the town so choose, instead of doing that borrowing over the 5 years? Will you leave the option for the municipality to figure out their share and say, we just want to do it in a one-shot deal, say our share is 150, instead of doing a borrowing, because then you get into interest and that 150 becomes maybe 175, 180 over the 5 years, maybe more. Borrowing rates are up, so if the board decided we could come up with, whether we use stabilization or whatever it may be, right, the rainy day fund that nobody seems to tap into. I think when we're talking about a high school, a renovation, maybe this is something that you just do it and say, here you go, this is if the board and the town agrees to do it that way. here it is, and let's see what happens, right?
I think that's a good question for us to ask on February 1st, because we'll have bond counsel there as well. And I think, and we all share bond counsel, which is another reason for this. And I think it's a good question for us to ask that evening. So I will ask that question. I don't have the answer for this
Okay, that's
evening.
fine. And the other question that I would have is, so the feasibility study, and I apologize for not being able to attend some of the stuff that's been going on, but
Not a
due to
problem.
a loss in the family, I was kind of trapped into dealing with that stuff, right? And not being able to attend some of your meetings.
I'm a
So-
phone call away, and you call me. We
Yeah, I
speak.
know, Aaron, I appreciate that, but is it, when you do the feasibility study, is just for an all-in, all-new building, keep the existing building going while the new building's going, or whatever that cost may be, 100 million, whatever it is, I know there's some crazy numbers out there, but costs out what the costs are gonna be.
Right.
Is that what that's gonna be, or is Old Colony and their staff and the committee that you put together looking at maybe not an all-new building, maybe a remodel / addition to the building to keep costs down?
I think what they'll do is they'll cost account for both, so that we have answers about what would it cost to have a new building, what would it cost to do a reno, what would it cost to have a hybrid of the two, so that we can have an informed decision to present to people and not make a decision without the information. So to your point, I think we will have an answer as to what the cost would be for each of those situations.
I just think, that option playing out, I mean, it's a lot of money, right?
Absolutely.
Let's use a number, an arbitrary number, $100 million.
And that's generous. I would say Cape Cod Tech built at a $128 million budget, and they came in under budget, and that was before our supply chain issues, right?
Correct.
And construction's gone crazy. So while I appreciate it, I hesitate to throw any number at it, but to your point, but you make a valid
Just
point.
being conservative with my
Right.
numbers, it's 100, right?
Right.
Just arbitrarily speaking, use the 100 number.
Yeah.
Where maybe where the expansion's needed. Perhaps you want to add a different, like we talked in the past, I think we all have a little discussion on HVAC, introducing that shop to the school. Having that addition built on, and then obviously you need some additional classrooms put in as well.
Right.
Having that option being built there and still utilizing the school, the same thing as building a whole new school, is that option 40 or 50 versus, the 100, 125?
Right.
That pill's easy to swallow from dispersing it between the 5 schools. And from my perspective, being a graduate, and I think I speak for a lot of graduates of Old Colony, it'd be a shame to see that school knocked down.
Yeah. I think our struggle right now is we have no fire protection. We have no water redundancy. We're not ADA accessible. And any addition to that building requires a full overhaul to ensure fire protection, ADA accessibility.
How are
and
we
then
not ADA accessibility? The whole thing's flat on the ground.
grandfathered in doorways, width of doorways, certain pieces,
That's
right?
pretty cheap stuff, though.
Right,
to
but I think
replace.
the pieces of that puzzle certainly play a part in everything that they'll bring to the table.
Yeah.
And I know we can't build up,
No, I
right,
wouldn't.
as you know, because of the steel frame.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't. I'm just trying to, I think everybody really needs to put their minds together and looking
Yeah.
at it, because, you run the risk of 3 towns saying, we just can't afford it. But I think all of us, I don't want to speak for the other 4 communities, I'll speak for myself, is I think I can look at it and say, we need to do something now.
Yeah.
It's time.
And I think the big piece is that when people look through the vision for the future, they'll see that it's incredibly maintained, and I tip my hat to our maintenance staff. They do a wonderful job maintaining, but there are certain pieces of the puzzle that you don't see. And I equate it to a healthy-looking person who drops dead of a heart attack, right? They may look healthy, but you never know what's on the inside. And when you look at the bones, and again, we'll invite the community in to walk through and actually see the bones if they'd like. Some of the bones are beyond repair, and we're talking about pipes underground, we're talking about pipes in walls, we're talking about water tanks that are underground, a single well,
Yeah,
if
I've
something
seen
goes
that
wrong with the
before.
well, it's problematic. So to your point, I think it's very valid, and we need to do an in-depth study, and that's what the feasibility study will be for.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Sankley?
I think you both asked a lot of good questions. I'm getting a lot of good answers, and I'm very pro-education. And if it benefits, if we can figure out a way to make this work, I think it's at least beneficial to do the study for sure. And whatever you guys decide, I'm on board.
Right.
How long is the feasibility study, if it once completed, how long is that good for?
They'll do the feasibility study will take just about, I want to call it a year, that will go through the feasibility study. I got to look back at the dates just to be sure. I don't want to throw the wrong date out. But when you say how long is it good for? I'm not sure. I think, you hear about towns like Nauset who get a number from a feasibility study and they go back to the taxpayer base because the numbers came in so high.
Yeah.
And so, I think that with supply chains the way they are, I'm hoping we time it right, and we might be coming in at a time where we're recovering a little bit, because you see the ebb and flow in the construction world. I worked in it, I know it, but I think that it's tough to predict.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Right?
Everything is these days, isn't it?
Absolutely.
Well, again, I don't want to get ahead of our process.
Right.
I think you can read the room as far as how this board feels about this feasibility study. I think we've made decisions over the years from a budget standpoint that I think would allow us to look at this favorably. I know, again, speaking for myself, I'm in favor of a feasibility study, so take that into account. As you know, we do have a budget process, but that said, I think there's one thing for sure that we can get behind, we can rally behind as a community, and would urge our partners in this is the legislation that you talked about, because the voters passed the Fair Share Amendment that's over $1 billion of new tax revenue, not a one-time hit, annually.
Right.
So like literally the legislature every year could pick a pet theme as to what they want to fund.
Right.
And vocational education is all the rage and in the news from a standpoint of how it impacts admissions, and that's a policy fight. But I would urge, it's not on our agenda to vote on. Well, actually it is. I would urge the Board of Selectmen to vote in favor of endorsing this legislation and sending a letter to our delegation, ask them to sign on to the bills, but also to our partnering communities and ask them to join us in supporting this legislation as well.
Sure.
So at least you've got something you can walk away from tonight, is that, and I appreciate you and your association for taking this on and being forward-thinking.
Sure.
Because it would be malpractice if the legislature didn't support something like this.
Well, when Mr. Gaspar speaks about the cost to our member towns, I think we really do need to contemplate that. I sit on the MASS Executive Board and on the MAVA Executive Board, and in my role, I feel it's my responsibility to advocate on behalf of our member towns. And so when this came up, as recently as today, I spoke to our executive director and I said, what I'd really like to do is have a copy of those bills that were recently submitted, because it was just last week. And if you could send them over, I'm meeting with Acushnet this evening, and I'd like to be able to share that information with them. So, we'll continue to do our due diligence and advocate on behalf of all of our member towns and make sure that our approach is as palatable as possible.
I mean, look, a couple weeks ago, we had a session on DEP regulations on nitrogen mitigation, and the room was packed. We had Representative Schmidt was here.
Mm-hmm.
We communicated with Senator Montigny, and they had a hearing at UMass Dartmouth. But the senator and the legislative delegation, they file legislation to put a halt to what the DEP is trying to do. So the process works. And I know we've talked about it. I would encourage you to engage your student body and their families to support this legislation.
Sure.
Because the grassroots stuff really does work. So with that, gentlemen, is there a motion to support, to endorse HD 485 and SD 1697, an act to improve access, opportunity, and capacity in Massachusetts vocational technical education?
So moved.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Is there a motion to send a letter to our partnering communities and asking them to do the same thing and either do a joint letter with us, either sign on to a letter or do their own, and we can send that into Mr. Polanski and let our legislative delegation know as well.
Thank you all.
Absolutely.
Right,
Absolutely.
thank you. Thanks for your presentation.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you.
All right. Have a wonderful night, gentlemen.
Have a great
You
night.
as well.
Cheers.
Oh, we're not getting the budget from you?
I can give you a quick overview. if you'd
No,
like.
it's fine, we can come in some other time. It's
Yeah,
just,
if you'd like.
and the other consideration for the committee, and I hope to be able to get together with you and all the folks there.
Yeah.
I know quite a few of those folks from the time that I was a liaison for the FinCom, right? and I believe it's Shirley Bork.
Shirley Burke, yeah,
Make sure you tell her I said hello.
I will.
Super intelligent woman. And just, it's the consideration of what we're doing when you expand the school, the footprint of the school.
Yeah.
Because there's also a budget impact there as well.
100%.
Because you have to house new teachers, new classrooms, expanded classrooms and things of the like. So that's a long-term commitment that the towns are also gonna make with that. Not just the school debt, comes the school budget, which will be a pretty big increase for every municipality as well. So
Right.
there's a lot of things for us to be sitting at the table discussing so that everybody can vet that out and say, well, how about this and how about that? What's the impact of that before we start designing the future?
Absolutely.
Right, thank you.
Thank you.
I think that just in closing, I know the governor, with a new governor, the budgetary process is behind what it typically would be. But what we'll look to do is have a meeting sometime in February to give people an idea of where we're at, using an approximation and probably a lower number for Chapter 70, maybe even a level-funded Chapter 70, which would be a worst-case scenario. And then in March, when March 1st rolls around, we'll have a better idea.
Great, outstanding.
Thank you.
You're
All
welcome.
right,
Thanks.
cheers.
Thank you.
All right, next item. It is on the, we do have it on there for the budget. Was Mr. Plansky supposed to do that, or are we doing that separately?
No, in case he did.
Okay, great. We'll do that another time. I think that was,
I didn't want him to start mentioning it.
Yeah.
And have someone say it wasn't on the agenda.
yeah. Okay, good. All right, Mr. Kelly, we're gonna go through, these are what we would deem sort of non-controversial budget items, and just to get some, I guess, to take the temperature of the board on how we feel about these. So, Mr. Kelly, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, for the finance committee budget, we cut it $1,000. That was on advice of Todd, that because of the expenditures, he looked at the history of expenditures and saw that it was cut.
All right.
We could afford to cut the salary level. The FinCom reserve, we left level funded. The moderator, we left level funded. Weights and measures, level funded. Cable, level funded. The regional is transfers of 2 items from miscellaneous, and there's a third item, the Serpent budget, that was, for whatever reason by the past administration, not included in the assessments. However, it's, as of 2017 and earlier, it was in your assessments. But the problem is, you're not supposed to use assessments when you are billed.
Okay.
So Todd advised that because they send us a bill, that we include Serpent. And it's a very modest increase, and that's because Serpent increased their billing.
Okay.
Board of Appeals is level funded. Forestry is increased by $2,000. We added a police detail line there, so we could track that. Cemeteries is level funded. Veterans is level. Historical is increased by $800, $500 for signs, because we have some really deteriorating signs we want to take care of, and $300 by energy. The debt is a different format this year. What we've done is we put all the debt on one page in the budget so people can see the whole thing, including the school debt, because last year, if you remember, the school presented an operating budget and did not include the debt figures. So this is being transparent. The debt figures are out there. All of them.
Okay. Went down. I checked you. I got everything right now, big guy.
Retirement went up, the Bristol County goes up, 102,308. The Medicare, I just wanted to remind the board, that's based on payroll. It's a formula, so once we finish the budget, we'll refine that figure, but as you can see, we just left it level funded right now. And that pretty much is the quick budgets. As you can see, most of them are level funded.
Just Jim,
Yeah. Yes.
the, just for Mr. Kelly for the future, I was going through these budgets to my previous book, and the numbers weren't jiving so much, but you know, the little ticker starts moving around, so like on the veterans budget, it says it's level, but that's because it was reduced on town meeting floor in the fall, correct?
Correct.
So if we could just put notes on the budget so that when we, the board, are looking at budgets from the previous year budget book, I'm looking at it, scratching my head going, where'd that 30 grand go? Because that's the difference in that budget, right?
So, we'll put notes in.
It's, when you do
In the margins.
the little spreadsheet thing, you can just put a little note on the bottom of it, right, and just say, due to a reduction or increase in town meeting.
Yep.
For instance, I think DPW and the gasoline, we got an extra 25 at fall town meeting. Whether or not that's gonna be flowing into the budget this year,
There are certain departments that got a little bit.
that have those little, that we did things at the fall town meeting.
Yeah,
It just makes it easier for, you know, when I'm staring at numbers that go, oh man, how come this ain't matching up? So because I do all of that to make sure everything, the checks and balances.
I know.
So, but I did go through them all and keeping track of it all.
Yeah, Todd is a little bit exact, which is really great for an
Yeah,
accountant.
that's what we want.
And he put the numbers as of the true FY '23 budget.
Right. I want to go back to the debt.
Yep.
Do we have, I'm looking for like what the actual obligation is, right? So for instance, how much do we still owe on the school renovation?
I will, we have a spreadsheet that shows all the debt payments and when they fall off, what year they can continue to. So I will provide the board with that spreadsheet.
So whatever,
I think
that number
Mr.
is for when
Gaspar-
we did the, you're talking really like that long-term debt, right? So we just did a school roof, but we know how that's gonna be funded. That's not part of our debt right now.
I'm looking at the school renovations still
Yep.
and the police station. Those are the two debt exclusions, right, with the
Yeah.
taxpayers?
Yeah.
Uh,
So the school comes off, I believe, 2027, that debt.
Right, so what I'm asking, right, so like, I'd like to know what that balance is, right?
So there's a spreadsheet we have. I can provide the board with it for the whole debt is.
Right, because here's where I'm going with it. Like,
For
let's
that.
just say the schools, right, if it's $600,000 that we have left to pay, if we're able to, if there's no pre-penalty, is there pre-penalty?
There's, in a number of the bonds, there are
Right,
pre-penalties.
so I'm just saying, like something like that, where it's a lot of money, but it's not a lot of money, right? If we were able to, with free cash or surplus cash, if we were able to wipe that off the books, that's essentially a tax reduction for our residents,
Of course,
right?
of course.
So rather than money sitting in an account that, yeah, maybe we use it or not use it, but if we're able to, something like that, which is
Mhm.
wipe that off the books, that's the closest thing we can do to give a tax reduction to our residents.
Yeah, I've
right?
talked about it a few years.
Retire our debt.
Yeah, absolutely.
See if we
I
can.
looked at one of them and there is a penalty. I'll look at the other.
Well, you know, it's nice, like,
The penalty's
the
a penalty,
chairman's
right?
saying is, what's the penalty?
Right.
If I'm going to the penalty box for $5,000 and I can wipe that off and clear for the taxpayers, it comes off the levy,
Right.
and that's being added to the levy every year, that debt exclusion, that's what that is, right? A debt exclusion is added to the levy every year. And you kick that off,
I'm a
You
big
know?
believer is the new problem better than the old problem, right? If the new problem is we're paying a little bit of a penalty.
yeah, I've talked about it in the past, but they always said there's a
Easier for
penalty,
people.
and I don't know what that penalty is, I don't think it was ever explained to us exactly what it is,
Anyway.
but I'm in 100% agreement to do that.
Actually, we should have, probably schedule a Zoom at some point for our advisors
Okay.
and have them talk to the board, not only on questions like that, but on questions as far as we're retiring some of these debts, how we can maybe look at a better bond rating.
Right. Good. Okay. So this is just for pre-read advisory. You don't need a vote from us on this stuff now, right? It's just a-
All I need is a consensus of the board that we can put these aside until the final figures like in Medicare comes in. Most of the
The only
others
one-
are all
Yeah.
small.
The retirement of debt and all that stuff, so the pensions, the last few that are on that list, but we can just approve all preliminary, right?
Yep.
That would be my motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion
If
carries.
you need to come back to them, we'll come back to them.
I don't think I hope I don't have to start cutting budgets at $5 a whack.
Right.
I don't
Alright.
think so.
New business. David Longval is a resident who's interested in being appointed to the Cultural Council. Is there a motion to appoint Mr. Longval?
So move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All in favor, this is a yes. Thank you, Mr. Longval, for your wanting to serve. All right, next communication sent to us by the town accountant regarding excess spending. Mr. Kelly.
This concerns primarily we need a reserve fund transfer for the legal budget. We are at the point where we are above the legal budget, excluding the land court one, which we are reserving, which is 17,000, which in the past you've used to supplement the regular legal budget. However, this year, because of all our takings and taking the 3 years that we're looking at for the tax liens, etc., we want to reserve that 17,000. So when you look at it, you're at about 74,000 in legal expenses, and you're halfway through the year. Going deep, we have one major item that's 26,000. And that doesn't include 9,000 that we've been charging to the insurance liability account because it's a deductible. And then the vast majority of others we have about 8,000 in public records analysis, 9,000 in planning, various of the labor cases are 21,000, and then the rest is miscellaneous. In the past, we've gone to at the end of the year to balance the budget. I think and Todd thinks it's time we did a reserve transfer now and go forward, because looking at the fact that I've only got 5 months of billings from town council and where we're at.
Yeah, there's no way you're gonna make, there'll be a huge deficit for the end of the year, and you're never gonna make that. And
I don't want it to hit free cash for future years. If you don't take care of it, then the DOR hits your future free cash. Or you have to pay for it out of next year's free cash at the May town meeting.
Are we still on, the chairman, in the beginning of his chairmanship, we voted on saying that, not to use town council unless it's been approved by the TA. Is that still being done, or we
Yes.
have people just?
No. When you look at it, you're looking.
I haven't seen a detailed breakdown, so,
Well,
we don't need to talk about it on there.
I'm looking at, for 3 or 4 major labor cases,
Okay.
20,000.
Yeah, that's fine.
You know what the cases are.
Yeah, that's fine.
Uh,
Just making sure that it's not, getting out of control where people are picking up the phone, and the chairman kind of had this vote on that early in his chairmanship, and I just wanted to make sure that we're still sticking to that policy where it's not, everybody picking up the phone free will and.
A couple of our issues with our friend Mr. Higgins bang the public records.
Yeah, so, I get it, and I know that we have some things going on with planning and things of the like as well,
Yeah.
so it's all
Yeah.
things that we have to do, but,
Some of the solar stuff is close to.
so you need a motion to approve the reserve fund transfer in the amount of $45,000?
Please.
There's the motion.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. All right. All right, Mr. Kelly, department reorganization presentation. This is just for information only at this stage.
Correct. I met, the board asked me to meet with the planning board, give them a recommendation as far as what was going on to fill the planner position or a hybrid thereof. Well, when we started to dig into not only the planning department, but the other inspectional services departments, we found out that there was no coordination between the departments, documentation issues abound, and there was questions whether there were sufficient records to record the actions of the various boards. We found multiple versions of plans for the same project, a number of them unsigned. We found waiver of fees without a statement defining the town's interest in the waiver, insufficient sureties, missing as-built plans, and insufficient documentation of inspection. We also found that a part of the software, the inspection software, was disabled, the safeguard section, and that there was issues with customer service. So I asked the board to look it over, and we're still in discussion with I'll be in discussion with the other boards involved, and then I'll come back to you with the final recommendation.
Well, again, I think conceptually, I only speak for myself, I can't speak for anybody else, obviously, but personally, I think we got a huge gap in this town as far as economic development, putting together an agenda that'll create some new growth in a very respectful way that doesn't impede on the quality of life. I mean, I'll give 2 examples. Just within the last 2 weeks, I was at a restaurant in New Bedford, I was talking to the owner, very interested in possibly a Acushnet. We don't really have those opportunities, right? A week later, I got a phone call from a gentleman who's interested in an indoor sports facility, not quite as big as Fort Kicks in Taunton, but something that would allow for indoor lacrosse, training, football, soccer, you name it. Again, we don't have a plan to address that. Those are 2 opportunities that we're missing out on. I think if we had some degree of a North Star in that direction, there'd be opportunities that we might not even see. I think we're leaving money on the table from a grant standpoint. And I think we're stuck in neutral. I mean, we run the risk of going from 2023 to 1983 if we don't properly staff a department like this. So my feeling conceptually, I think we need somebody who can help us get to the next step. And if that next step is just tweaking around the edges, great. But I think there's a huge gap. So that's my feeling.
We also have a master plan, open space plan, housing plan, and transportation plan that are all totally out of date.
Right.
Yeah, well, I mean, I looked at this kind of structure, and I mean, I'm not in agreement with this particular structure of how it is. You got a lot of headwinds, right? You got union negotiations to be had. You got other elected boards that are involved with this kind of a restructure. I think it takes a lot of discussion and buy-in, and you know, if that doesn't work out, I mean, you know, the master plan. I've seen other communities do it. I'm not one to want to be, you know, creating high-paid positions for a short-range thing. I mean, I understand the economic development. I'm all about that. That was one of my big charges for when 2016 we passed the CWMP, because quite honestly, without the CWMP, you ain't doing crap commercially, right? Because nobody's coming to town. There's no land space where there's sewer, really big plots of land to do those kind of ideas. And that's why that CWMP was so important to myself. I believe it was Mr. Rockcliffe was on the board. I give him a lot of credit for that as well, pushing that CWMP with me. And we got that thing to pass. So it's really, you know, that's the key, is looking at sewer. Where can we bring it where there's open space, where it can be developed for commercial? You know, I agree, Chairman Wona. I've had conversations with different people for different kind of businesses for the town of Acushnet too, right? Unfortunately, they say, well, where can I put that? And I'm like, well, there's a couple of commercial lots behind a dairy that we did several years back, 2012 or 13. You were on the board with me when we did that. We did that, but you know, it's all up to the owner whether or not he wants to go forward just because it's zoned commercial there. Does he really want to sell any more lots off to put in commercial that, you know, maybe not keeping it in the family, right? It's a family-owned property, so you're kind of limited there as well. I'm sure if we brought a sewer line in, which isn't cheap, and you got 300 residents on my side of that town, you got to get those people to buy in and say, yeah, we're buying it to sewer, and then we can get it. So there's kind of, I talked to Mr. Kelly not too long ago when we were discussing Slocum Street. You know, we talked about the public-private thing, and you know, I'm trying to talk to certain people from the private sector to see maybe if they wouldn't mind sharing in some of those costs to get sewer lines to certain places and helping that out so they have space available. But you know, the land's been sitting for 100 years, 150 years, and some of it's not buildable for housing because they can't put septics because it won't perk. The water table's too high, right? So I mean, if you get sewer, now we got a different story going on. So you know, I'm all for it. Hopefully trying to raise that commercial class instead of us being at that 88% residential class. That's why it hurts so much with tax bills and the budget. So, you know, it's something that we have to get through town meeting. You have to discuss different things, avenues, and you know, structures with our current staff on how we can do things better, serve the community. You know, some positions don't need to be full-time. Some, in my eyes, could be part-time. And then maybe you take that extra money from the full-time to part-time. We did it in conservation, right? So you made full-time, part-time.
Yeah.
No.
Well, I think
We can start looking at all of that and have that discussion, and who knows, you know, you might have people that are in positions right now, you know, right now, though, I'll say this, instead of trying to rush something and just putting a title and having somebody be the overseer of all these other big salaries, right? Because we do have a lot of big salaries, and things have gone awry for many years, and it's a shame, but, you know, we're trying to push the town into a different trajectory. I'll say this, I met Andy, the new building commissioner, good guy, solid credentials, he's a by the book kind of guy. I think, you know,
having him in place now in the building department, I think a lot of the crap that's happened in the past will never happen again moving forward. So that's my sane point of view, looking at there, where he can help out and look at things going on and give his opinion to the planning board, so that there's a little bit of a savior there with the new Andy Bumble. So with that said, and Mr. Kelly's been in numerous meetings, I happen to sit through a couple of them, dealing with those solar farm and all the issues and everything else that's going on. And Andy brought up the same point that I spoke on several years back, is you need a freaking checklist. Really, it comes down to a sheet of paper. And everybody needs to sit and abide by that checklist. Nothing gets done unless the previous person signed off or everybody signed off. And for some reason, that's gone to hell in a handbasket. It really sucks to listen to all of that in those meetings, but it's not like I didn't know that crap was going on. And now, I think we have a new building inspector. We have new members on the planning board. Some of the old members on the planning board have an abundance of experience. So, hopefully we can change the course of how the town's been operating. And maybe some of it'll self-correct, and maybe we can finally get ourselves going in that direction and in sync with master plans and involving the community. And at Mattapoisett, I talked about it a couple of years ago. Mattapoisett did one. It was an online version where Serped was involved with it and helped out with that process.
The survey, yep.
And they did it online, and everybody from the community could put their public input, what's important, kind of like what we did last time. What's important to you? Is this important? And you grade everything of importance, and then you kind of incorporate that, but you let the whole community engage instead of a couple of knuckleheads sitting behind a closed door saying this is what's going to be in the master plan, end of story. It's never going to work that way. The community's got to be engaged in that master plan, and we got a master plan, and a lot of it hasn't been done. So a lot of that we can just kind of shuffle in, but there's a lot of new, and I think a lot of new opportunities we need to integrate into the old one, right? So an update would be nice. So a lot of ways we can try to move forward as a community and make everything a better place to live.
I don't disagree, right? I think we're talking the same thing. The value of a person that Mr. Kelly's suggesting is you've got a quarterback, right? I mean, and right now, as you said, we got a building inspector. That's great. I'm glad we've got a building inspector, but his job is to inspect buildings, not necessarily look at economic development opportunities or to put together a SWOT plan or what an economic analysis would be like if we allowed for assisted living facilities in town, like what that revenue would bring in, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I got you.
And chase down the grants. I mean, there's a ton of money out there that we are just, that we're leaving on the table. So anyway, it's a discussion, and I hope we'll just keep an open mind. Mr. Hinckley?
You guys both make a lot of good points. My biggest concern, Mr. Kelly, would seeing there's a lot of in and out on this sheet, which is well done, and thanks for all the numbers. I'd be concerned with how the union would react to it.
Yeah, I've already talked to the union. They agree on their management rights clause, the union that was affected. We can, as long as the titles are not affected and the present salary rates are not affected. And that means the hourly rates, not the total salary.
Sure.
Because the salary rate's what's in the contract. We can have the right to reorganize departments.
Okay. All right. I still think that it definitely needs some discussion, and we get everybody on board.
There's 72 communities, Worcester County, east and south, that have all sorts of different hybrids of this. So this is just to start the discussion.
Yeah,
There
sure.
is no, every town has a little different way of doing things. It's just that when we looked at the records, and Mr. Gasper and I almost fell off the table when we found 4 different, totally different plans for the same project with no signatures on the plans to prove that anybody had ever voted on those plans.
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Very good. Thank you. All right, next item is the Allen Street abatement.
Mr. Chairman, can I comment please on this before we get into discussion? We've done this in the past. I just had a conversation with Mr. Kelly, and I think it's pertinent that the board, and I know the board hasn't reviewed this document, but this is a whole packet with a history on this property. And if the board wouldn't mind, I'd rather not get, because some of it's legal, I'd rather not get too in-depth in conversation with it, so if we can just make a motion to table it, and if the board so chooses, could I go head-to-head with Mr. Kelly on this to resolve this issue, because this has been going on since 2015. One of the memos I have here, I think we'll make a copy of the packet to share with the board. There's a lot of mumbo jumbo. This person promised that person, a carrot today for a cheeseburger tomorrow. It's gotta be resolved. It's unfair to the family, and it could possibly end up being unfair to the community. So I think it needs to be resolved once and for all, and I'm willing to take this on because I'm familiar with the family, I'm familiar with the issue, and I don't wanna keep putting a Band-Aid over it.
Is there a motion to table?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Next item is the CVE conservation land restriction. I feel like we've been on this before, but Mr. Kelly, what do you know?
I think they're over there.
Yeah, he's ready.
This is a transfer of a conservation restriction from a governmental body to a land trust. And I believe the representative is here on Zoom.
All right, is that Steve? Hey, Steve.
Hey guys, how you doing? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great, okay. Thanks so much for letting me meet with you virtually here, and hopefully I can provide the detail you need.
All right, just tell us about the project and what you're looking to do.
Sure. So as you know, there's a large parcel of land. We used about 12 acres of it for solar development. There's another 65, 66 acres that are being, through a state program, we're going to be enacting a environmental conservation restriction is going to be placed on that. The Fairhaven Acushnet Land Trust is going to be managing that and kind of enforcing that. So we've got that in place. It was kind of a requirement of the state permit so that we could build a solar project on the 10 or 12 acres that we essentially put the rest of that land back into conservation. That conservation restriction will protect the eastern box turtle that's on the property, as well as really anything else that's there. I know a question had come up in terms of access on the last meeting, so I just wanted to be able to address that. I can provide further detail on the project if you guys need some more detail on it.
Will there be community access to that, public access to those lands, or?
So the answer is yes. We're comfortable with public access being provided. As we understand it, the access that's existing has been somewhat limited. I think it's mostly hunters. The land doesn't really necessarily have nature trails, but certainly it's accessible for hunters. And the land preservation trust is comfortable with hunting on the property. We're looking for limited access, whatever's been kind of historical, to be continued in that way, but not really to kind of open it up to lots of new use, I think is what our intent is.
Mr. Chairman. It's Steve, right? Steve, so I brought up the question because on page 1 of 19, it just says scenic landscape preservation. Do you have a copy of this, the conservation restriction itself?
Yes, and honestly, a lot of that is just kind of boilerplate, language that's in there, and then I think it gets down to these sorts of discussions that define what does that mean for this piece of property.
Yeah, sure. So it just, and I spoke about this last time, will further protect and enhance the area's scenic and open space attributes and the recreational human enjoyment and ecological value of the premises. So that to me says, if we have access, if somebody's in there doing what they're doing, right? Yeah, it's okay, because it says for human enjoyment, right, and recreational. I mean, we're not gonna build baseball fields there, but recreational is hunting, right?
Right, that's correct. Yeah,
Okay.
we just don't want to kind of establish new trails and find
Correct.
new ways to use the property.
Okay, that's fine. But then on page
8 of 19, it says the grant, on the C, access, it says the grantor hereby grants to the grantee or his duly authorized agents or representative the right to enter the premises upon reasonable notice and at a reasonable times for the purpose of inspecting premises to determine compliance with or to enforce this conservation restriction. The grantor also grants to the grantee, after notice of a violation or failure of grantor to cure said violation, the right to enter the premises for the purpose of taking any and all actions with respect to the premises and may be necessary or appropriate to remedy or abate any violation thereof. So that's kind of saying the opposite, isn't it?
I mean, it's, I guess it is a little, there's, yeah, I don't know if it's the opposite, but there's certainly kind of conflicting language there. And, you know, this is just language that's kind of preset, you know, in this language that the state kind of puts forward in the covenant restriction, the conservation restriction. You know, we've kind of talked about this internal within CVE and the Land Preservation Trust. You know, so there's understanding there. So, you know, I think that, as I've described, we're open to that, you know, to that kind of use. I don't know that we can go back to the state and ask them to change that language around.
Isn't this going to transfer though, getting the state out of it and turning the restriction over to Acushnet Haven Land Trust?
Right. Once it's transferred over to the land trust, you know, then we have essentially satisfied the state's requirements for, you know, permitting, and that's what we need to do. We need to finalize the permitting with this. I mean, the project is complete. You know, everything's operational. But in order to finalize the permitting, you know, we have to successfully transfer this land over to the Land Preservation Trust. So that certainly will remove, you know, the state once this is complete. It'll be really just, you know, the town and the Land Preservation Trust in terms of how the property is used, you know, with CV as a partner to both of those parties. But I would agree, and I think your attorney is there as well, that the state would be then somewhat removed from decision making on the property.
So would it be fair to say that if the town, well, we have to get the Faven Board of Selectmen to do it too as well, right? Because it's Acushnet Faven. But if the town of Acushnet was in favor of it, which, you know, obviously I want to conserve as much land as I can. This kind of has to be because of the habitat that's there, right?
Right.
So,
yeah,
and normally when we, you know, most times other than doing something with like the Coalition of Buzzards Bay, we do a conservation restriction and we become owners of the property. In this particular matter, you're holding the land. You're just looking for a conservation restriction. You're not turning that parcel of land over to the Acushnet Haven Land Trust. You're going to remain the owner of those acres, and all we're doing is holding a restriction, which basically says you're never going to be able to build on it again.
That's correct, yeah. And
so
we're kind of carrying the insurance and the risk on all that.
Right. You carry all of that, right?
Correct, that's right.
So,
yeah, we carry the insurance and the risk on it.
Are you open to having that conversation, and if we kind of vote, just making sure, so I'm sure people aren't going to be out there, you know, slugging, you know, deer, you know, 50 feet away from your solar field because his house is over there. But what I just don't want people to get caught up in is if they're walking through that area of land to get to different, there's a lot of land in back of that, right? The town owns 125 acres, PJ Keating owns 380 acres. There's a lot of land there, a lot of forestry there for hunters, and I know a lot of people that do hunt back there. All I want to know is have a peace of mind that if somebody was out there, they wouldn't be getting, you know, arrested or, you know, in trouble for being on that property through your company or through the Acushnet Haven Land Trust. That's all I'm looking for. It's just it's more of a peace of mind knowing that if somebody's walking through the property, you know, not creating any havoc or anything like that, there's not going to be that kind of a problem.
There wouldn't be, you know, as long as, you know, again, obviously assuming that there's, you know, legal use here, right? You know, people are, you know, legally using the proper guns on the site or anything like that. You know, we're only looking for, you know, peaceful use of the land, you know, for human enjoyment, not to open it up, you know, beyond anything that's been opened up to already. But if the land is being used legally, the only signs that we planned on posting, the Fairhaven and Acushnet Land Preservation Trust will post their signs, which indicate, you know, that it's a land preservation trust. But there would not be anything else to kind of indicate, you know, anything about hunting or how the land would be used. You know, we just want to kind of, you know, keep it to and there's no way to, to really enforce this, but to minimal use, as that land has been used in the past.
Got it, thank you.
Great. Very good. Any other questions? Great, thanks, Steve.
Thank you, Steve.
We need
Is there a vote?
a motion to
Motion to approve the conservation restriction at 88 Wayne
transfer.
Lane.
Yeah.
There's a motion, is there a
So
second?
move.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries. Done.
Thanks, Steve.
Great, thank you guys, I really appreciate it.
All right.
We'll see you soon, take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
All right, Mr. Kelly, next item on the collections.
All right, as you know, we've identified $464,286 that should have been processed in tax collections and put into the collection process of notification, advertisement, and lien that hadn't been done in the past. Mr. Gasper and I were talking about the way the memo came from Angela, and after I talked to her, if under the first section in the block, where it's 156,814.47, you draw a line. And then you draw a line below $307,471.69, then it starts to make sense. The first block then is the amounts that were added to previous takings and liens, which we just have to add, they're not new. Then the initial taking, the 307,471 and change, were when the various letters were sent. After the letters were sent, $67,156 and change came in, and there was still $240,314 that we have to take action on. Now, for the fiscal year 20 amounts, the advertising was done on January 30th. The advertising will be done on January 30th, and the taking will be on February 14th. For the fiscal 21 amounts, the advertising will be done in the newspaper in February. The takings will be done in March. For the fiscal year 22, the advertising will be done in March and the takings in April. You're looking at, for fiscal year 20, about $108,000 and change. Fiscal 21, $139,000 and change. Fiscal 22, 216, almost 217,000. Now, with the fiscal 22, once this process starts, if there is any loans or bank issues on the properties, usually the bank then steps in and pays the back taxes.
Okay. All right.
So hopefully, and just so the board knows, we've actually collected the 67,000, and we have discussions with folks at about another 25,000 are coming in over the next 2 weeks.
Got it. So do we have a heat map of properties, like if somebody's not paying, right? Can we put together like a map? So what would be the next step? Would those go out to auction and the general public? So we don't want to be just sitting on a bunch of property, right?
Well, we have to advertise, then we have to go through the takings,
Yep.
go to do the land court proceedings.
So we go through all that stuff and we get a bunch of property on our hands. What next?
Well, then you could either auction the property, or you can deal with one of the companies that will buy the properties off you
Okay.
and then auction it themselves and make a
Got
profit.
it, okay. All right. Yeah, it's an unfortunate situation. You hate to see anybody in this, but at the end of the day,
It's a $500,000
It's-
almost.
I mean,
It happened in 2014-15 when Alan did it.
we got a lot of
Christie
people.
Costa was the treasurer.
We got a lot of people,
That's how we paid for the CWMP.
we got a lot of people who are
It is.
footing the bill, I mean, it's just an obligation. And we talked about retiring debt. I mean, look, if you're able to pull up and collect on this, right, so anyway.
We do, so back to last time this occurred, I believe that the board was sympathetic.
Right.
And we've always said that the town will do everything in its power to try to help a family stay there and resolve the issue and pay incrementally. So I hope that same message, if the board's okay with that message,
Of course.
is being
Right.
communicated.
It's a good faith effort, as long as somebody's
You know
making
what I
a good
mean?
faith
As long as they're making an effort to pay, and it's a reasonable amount where it ain't gonna be 20 years for, because you just keep falling behind. I think that's where we were at last time, because I'll speak for myself, very sympathetic for anybody.
This is the first time you can speak for me on that one, Kevin.
Well, you were part of that last
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
Dave,
yeah.
so I'm
This is-
sure
I
you
couldn't
share
agree
the.
more.
What we're
Yeah.
doing is just to protect the town's rights in the properties and to the collections. As I told you, there's 25,000 that the treasurer collector's office has already been in discussion with the folks involved and have made various agreements with them.
Good. Very
Excellent.
good. Thank you. All right.
We just keep cleaning up the things we find.
Good, thank you for that.
You're gonna need a bigger broom.
Got some info-only stuff in here. The town
Maybe a
administrator.
leaf blower.
that, we can read some information. Gentlemen, is there anything on the selectmen announcements that you want to offer up?
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes, of course.
Just wanted, I was reached out by a member of the Conservation Committee, and they are indeed looking for another member. So if anybody in the public is interested in serving the town on the Conservation Committee, they have a meeting tomorrow night on the 25th if you want to see what they do. And if you are interested and looking forward to putting some volunteer work into the town, send a letter of interest to the Board of Selectmen, and we'd be happy to get the process moving. I think having full committees and boards is very important, not only for quorums, but for a good dialogue between everybody on the boards. So any other committees that you see on the website that need vacancies, if you're interested, now's the time. There's many people that want to volunteer and sign up and help out our community. It's well appreciated by all of us. That's it.
All right, Mr. Gasper, anything on the selectmen's announcement?
Other than next meeting's the day before my birthday. That kinda hurts.
It's all
Well,
right.
maybe we can.
It's Chief's birthday today, and he's sitting here.
We can mess around with this.
It's the fire chief's birthday.
Great.
Yeah, yeah, that's a
All
good
right.
selectmen's announcement.
Mr. Chairman,
Yeah.
in the information only, the youth soccer
Yep.
has a new president. May
Okay,
I
get to that.
suggest that the board put together some kind of acknowledgement for the outgoing president?
100%. Yep. Actually, I'd like to invite him into a meeting. Paul Massaraco, so for those of you who don't know, Paul Massaraco was the longtime president of the Acushnet Youth Soccer, stepping down. Christina Piper is stepping in, but Mr. Massaraco has been a leader in this community, on behalf of the young boys and girls who played in the Acushnet Youth Soccer League, just the driving force behind the improvements to the fields, just an overall good guy. I know his vice chair, Paul Fonseca. AYSA has just been outstanding partners in this. So Mr. Kelly, great shout out. We'll reach out to Paul and invite him in. I think it'd be worth a citation and recognizing his
Yeah, great guy.
his great work for the community. And then also want to, in the information only, a note from Acushnet, from the South Coast Bikeway. Just briefly, the South Coast Bikeway Alliance was greatly saddened to learn of the fatal bicycle and truck crash on December 22nd on South Main Street, we ask that you prioritize improvements to Acushnet's roadways to protect road users as construction workers, emergency responders, so on and so forth. There's a House legislation that was introduced and signed into law. And, again, I think it underscores, just not on South Main Street, but overall our bike safety, and just not only bicycle, but people on motorcycles. We're really gonna put some awareness out there and do what we can to improve our road conditions. So, with that said, we have Selectmen's meeting February 7th at 4 p.m. Set that.
There's a tentative one after that, Mr. Chairman, on the 14th,
Okay,
and then another one on the 28th,
okay,
because school vacation
Yeah.
week is the week in between,
okay,
and FinCom is going to be meeting on budgets, and I'd rather see if this board can comment on the budgets and then send it to FinCom.
okay, that's fair enough. All right,
That's the way it should be done.
so with that, Mr. Kelly, we
Yeah, first.
got two executive sessions on here.
Well, one of them is postponed.
Okay. Which one was that? One or two?
So the one's postponed.
Okay. All right, so is there a motion going to executive session under General Law, Chapter 30A, subsection 21A3, to conduct strategy in preparation for negotiations with union personnel, to conduct contract negotiations with union personnel, part-time fire paramedic salary grid, if an open meeting will have a detrimental effect on the bargaining position of the public body, as the chair so declares, and the board will not return to public session. Is there a motion?
So moved. Second.
All right, roll call vote. Mr. Gasper?
Yes.
Mr. Hinckley?
Yes.
And I'm a yes, and we are now in executive session.